What I want to talk about it needs a little bit of background information, so we're going to cover that instead. When I was home for Christmas, I was at my cousin's house, and our DM is one of his roommates, and he had purchased the Pathfinder Advanced Race Guide. And this was a cool book. I didn't even know it existed because I was too busy with school to pay attention. I say school, I mean residency. And I can say school because it's at a school. And the what it is it presents three sets of races. We actually have, well, they're not here. Anyway, it presents three sets of races. The first chapter is like the core races, the ones from the original Pathfinder book. And it has a couple pages of like culture and background and personality and other kinds of life issues for these races. What's it like to be a dwarf? And then it presents alternate racial traits. So, for example, as a dwarf, you have a bonus to attack, orcs and goblins, and you have a bonus to your armor class against giants. Well, some dwarves don't fight against those. Instead, they watch out for flying creatures, because dwarves are earth creatures, so obviously they hate flying creatures. So there's an alternate racial trait called Sky Sentinel. And Sky Sentinel gives you a bonus to attack and armor class against creatures who fly while you're standing on the ground. And in exchange, those dwarves give up their racial hatred ability, which is a bonus to attack against orcs and goblins, and their I don't remember what their dodge ability was called. Let's go down here real quick. Hi, dwarf. Defensive training, yes, against the giants. So you give that up, and in exchange, you get this bonus to flying creatures. It's something to add a little bit of character. All of the original races from the core rulebook have alternate racial abilities, like a whole page or two of them. Like there's a bunch of them, and each of them requires you to give up certain other abilities on your character. And then the next chapter is the featured races. And the featured races are those races that have been presented as racial options often, or have been presented in other games as a normal race option. So these are things like your plain touched, your Aasimar, your Tieflings, your Drow. It includes things like goblins, kobolds, hobgoblins, orcs. It includes the other kind of elemental plain touched, the sylph. I think it's actually in featured. There's the sylphs, the nereids, the Oreads, the Ifrit, and a couple other options as well. They're the more popular. And these ones also get like a page or so. There's less material per race in this chapter. So they'll get like a page or so of background info, and then a bunch of options, but not nearly as many as the core races. Oh, I also mentioned that for these, they'll also have racial feats, racial equipment, a variant racial class. For example, I think there's like a halfling paladin type special race. And so it takes some of the abilities away from the normal paladin class and adds in these paladin abilities that are kind of more appropriate or evocative of halflings instead. I think they're protectors of Yondala. I don't remember the name exactly. So they'll do that for the featured races as well. I think this might be the book where kobolds get the ability to attach like weapons to their tails, and then they can take a feat to make their tail a weapon, and then there's like these other weapons that require an exotic weapon proficiency unless you have that kobold feat, and they stick onto the end of your tail, so you can have like a club tail, or you can have a spiked tail, or you can have a slashy blade tail. The chapter after that are the uncommon races, I think is what they call them, and these are a bunch of options that are not standard fantasy races and would require a little bit more to incorporate into the regular assumed setting, I suppose. And this is where you find creatures like the Gripply, which is my absolute favorite. I love Gripplies. I've loved them ever since I first saw them in 2nd edition. They're these tiny little frog dudes, and they know how to use nets, and they have a climb speed, and they're very good at hiding and moving through the swamp. And they have the exact racial ability score adjustments that you would want for a gunslinger. And I so totally want to play like a Kermit the Frog who's also a sniper. That'd be awesome. Like he's hiding up in this, in these trees in the swamp, and he shoots this witch doctor in the head, and he dies. And then have you ever seen Kermit the Frog? Yay! And he's got his arms waving around, and my guy's just anyway. It's kind of stupid, but that's hilarious. So these are a lot of the less common races. I think there's like the Vanara, which are the monkeys from Indian mythology. I say Indian like that. I mean, I understand that incorporates a lot of area, but I don't honestly know if it's India in particular geographically or like Hindu mythology. So I'm going to leave that alone. There's also the Samsarans, which I really like, which I believe are also from the same mythology as the Vanara. And they are people who they reincarnate and come back to life, and they have the ability to call on like their past lives for knowledge bonuses and untrained skill bonuses and things like that. There's these snake people. I think there's actually like these two different types of snake people. One are actually like scaly serpentine snaky people, and then another one are just like humanish looking, but they're very big into poisons. There's all different kinds of races. Maybe it's under the expanded race examples. No, these are for the most... Oh, no, this is a mix. So these are some of the featured and uncommon races. So you have your catfolk, Dhampir, which are the half-vampire, Dwergar, dwarves, fetchlings, which I completely do not remember what those are, goblins, gripply, which I love, hobgoblins, rat folk, which are what they sound like, Suli, which I think are also from the Hindu or Indian mythology, Tengu, are bird people from Japanese mythology, undines, which are water spirits, the Vishkanya, I believe, are the poison users. Yeah, toxic. They can produce poison. They have a bonus to poison saving throws, things like that. So anyway, and they also have a couple racial traits for each of them, and I think they only get like a paragraph as far as their racial descriptions go. But they'll have a handful of alternate racial traits, and then like a couple variant class abilities, and maybe a feat or so. It depends on who you're talking to, which race you're dealing with. But anyway, I looked through those, and then I got to the race builder, and I wanted to build a race. And so I went back and I thought about the Kalupin. I don't think I've mentioned the Kalupin yet. So I had started this video earlier, and then it crashed. So I'm trying to remember what I mentioned there versus here. Years ago, when 3rd edition had come out, but 3.5 had not come out, my brother created a couple races, and they were very unique. I'm using air quotes. They had weird abilities that didn't quite make sense, but they added a lot of flavor to the race. And then they were, I mean, honestly, looking at them at that time in 3rd edition's development, they were overpowered, but that didn't really matter, because if my brother was going to, they were races that he created for use in his own campaign, so who cares if they're overpowered? If everybody's overpowered, then no one's overpowered, if you get my drift. Well, the very first one he created, if I remember correctly, was the Kalupin. And Kalupins were based a lot on the illustration of the Hound Archon from the 3rd edition monster manual, which someone took a screen capture of, which was not me. This is online. And this is the Hound Archon. Kalupins, as my brother envisioned them, were these dog-headed, beefy warrior guys. And they had a couple traits, all of which are kind of mirrored by this Hound Archon. They had a 40-foot movement speed, because wolves in the animal wolves in the monster manual had a 40-foot movement speed. I believe Hound Archons also had a 40-foot movement speed. So Kalupins had a 40-foot movement speed. They had a bite attack for 1d6 damage. They had automatic proficiency with the Greatsword, because for whatever reason, the Hound Archon and the Solar, which is the other picture, the head is cut off, they both use Greatswords. Apparently, Greatsword is the weapon of the angels. I think even not the Lantern Archon, but there's like the Trumpet Archon, and I think the Trumpet Archon can use its trumpet as a Greatsword too, back in 3rd edition. So, they had the Scent ability. They had a bonus to Constitution and a penalty to Wisdom, which we explained. I say we. My brother initially created the race. I came in and helped with a couple suggestions. And then we both decided, we were playing in a campaign at the time. We were both players. We wanted to use Kalupins as our characters. And so I helped, along with him, when we were making up our characters, kind of define some of the culture behind Kalupins. So We had, like, I created the god. My brother said that they had a goddess, but he didn't have a name for her. I was reading some book, and I honestly don't remember what it is, but it might have, I think the word thorn is in the title. And there was a character in that book, it was like a giant wolf, and its name was like Kantukuk, or something weird like that. So the Kalupins now have the Great Mother, the wolf goddess, and her name is Kantukuk. It's spelled with a Q, Kantukuk. We decided that they were Scottish. We don't know why. I think it was just because I have a catalog where I collect weapons. We've seen my swords before. And one of the swords that I really wanted but haven't purchased yet is a claymore. And so I had this cool picture of a claymore, and we both decided it'd be awesome if our dogs, because they're proficient with great swords, that we would use claymores. So now we're totally into Scottish territory. Plus, he's got like this, it's on both arms, but the wearing your tartan, I don't know if that's what the actual part of the clothing is called. But having that sash with your tartan or your pattern for your Scottish clan was common as well. So they could have that on. We did find a book at the library about Scottish clans, and I do not remember the clan. I think it was MacDonald or MacDougall or something like that. I want to say it started with a D. But anyway, their clan motto was Sons of Bitches. And we're like, that just works so perfectly for the Kalupins. We decided that they were these pan-dimensional, world-traveling conquerors. And that our characters were going to be sort of forward scouts. The Kalupins send out these scout teams, and their job is to eliminate spellcasters in the area, because spellcasters would, have the best chance of messing with bringing in additional reinforcements through magical gates or other such things. So my brother created a Kalupin wizard based on a Doberman pincer. So imagine this guy, but kind of like black with a brown belly and Doberman pincer head. And he was a wizard. He used a greatsword. He had a lot of feats towards counterspelling. This was back when the original 3rd edition improved counterspelling feat line had come out. And I created a Kalupin fighter who was going to take a lot of feats for grappling, because if you want to mess with a wizard in 3rd edition, or actually in a D20 game, you grapple them, because it gives them so many penalties to spellcasting. And my guy was based on an Old English sheepdog, the big shaggy dogs with the hair that comes down over their eyes and everything. So my guy was this big Chewbacca-looking dude with a greatsword on his back, and he would wrestle you to the ground and then just start gnawing on your face with his bite attack. And it was a lot of fun. We didn't get to play our characters, I don't think, even at all. We put them all together and everything, and then the guy stopped running games. But that's how we developed the Kalupins. So I said, I'm going to recreate the Kalupins using the Advanced Race Builder, and that's how I would learn how to build a race. So to go through the steps real quick, the very first step, and I think, right here, step 1 is concept. You need to come up with what you want your race to be and what your idea of this race is, not mechanically, but in flavor-wise. Do they have the questions here? Yeah. Where do they live and why? What do they look like? How does their appearance help them adapt? What's their history? Does they have a creation myth? Are there pivotal events? What kind of relationships do they have with the other races? Etc., etc., etc. What classes do your race tend to favor? Fun stuff like that. So I already had a very good idea of what the Kalupins were, and in fact, I already had a racial write-up from before, so I knew the kinds of things I wanted Kalupins to have. They should be fast, with a bit better movement speed than normal. They should have a natural bite attack. They should be able to sniff out enemies. I think they also had a bonus to, like, athletics skill checks, like climb or jump or something like that. I actually have the Kalupin somewhere on my computer, but I didn't pull it up because I have a good enough idea of what they would have. So I was going to do standard power levels so they could have up to 10 points, and they get 3 traits per category. When I created the very first race using this system, I said I'm going to use the system exactly as written. I'm going to follow all of the rules and make the Kalupins that way. So I did my concept. First thing you do is you choose your type. And for the most part, the system assumes, even if you're choosing a type that's not humanoid, which is what every normal player character race is, that you're going to be humanoid in shape. So even though they have like aberration, they're going to expect you to play an aberration like a mind flayer, where it has 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head. A normal human-shaped creature. If you're going to play a construct, you can see constructs have a ton of points. Let's see, there's dragon, fae, humanoid. Now, each of these doesn't give you any benefits except for what's listed here. So if you play an aberration, all you get is dark vision, and then that's it, pretty much. You get dark vision. You have to breathe, eat, and sleep. And you have the aberration type, which means spells like hold person, charm person, those don't work on you because those work on humanoids, whereas you're an aberration. So they have to use charm monster or hold monster. Constructs do give you a bunch of stuff, which is one of the reasons why they cost so many points. Dragons give you dark vision, low light vision, and then make you immune to sleep and paralysis. And you also gain the dragon type. You qualify for anything that requires you to be a dragon type. Fae gives you low light vision. That's it. So here's humanoid. If you play a humanoid, you have to choose a sub-race as well. And a sub-type. I'm sorry, not sub-race. And in Pathfinder, every humanoid race is like its own subtype. So elves are humanoid with the elf subtype, and dwarves are humanoid with the dwarf subtype, and goblins are humanoids with the goblinoid subtype. And if you're a Tengu, you're a humanoid with the Tengu subtype. So it's, on the one hand, when you're dealing with things like elves, if you look at old school, if you look at 3rd edition Forgotten Realms, there's like a million different types of elves. There's sun elves and high elves and wood elves and wild elves and gray elves, and there's all kinds of elves, aquatic elves. They all have the elf subtype. So it allows you to have all these different races that have the same subtype, and kind of tie them together that way. But then you have things like Tengu. There's Tengu the creature, and it has the Tengu subtype. But what other creature is going to have the Tengu subtype? You'd have to then create these other Tengus for that to have really any relevance to it. Monsters, humanoid, outsiders, plants, undead. They also have right here, to kind of, because constructs are 20 points and undead are 16, that means you absolutely cannot play a standard point race with those subtypes. With those types. They created this half construct and half undead type so that they're worth less points and they give you fewer bonuses and abilities automatically. So our Kalupins are humanoids, and they have the Kalupin subtype, because that's what we're going to do. Next, you choose their size. Large sizes cost a lot of points. Medium and small are the same. The system considers that if you're medium size or small size, because small gives you these bonuses, that they're equivalent. So your average race doesn't cost any points here. Your humanoid type gives you no points. Again, costs you no points to be medium or small. Then you have speed. If you have a 30-foot speed, no points. If you're slow, -1 point. So there, for your average small race, because you're giving them a slow speed, you get 1 point back. This is here because of dwarves. If the race is medium, its member speed is never modified by armor or encumbrance. That doesn't have to be necessary. For example, if I wanted to create a race that was medium-sized but had short, stubby legs and so didn't move very fast, but also had a penalty to, for example, strength, and was really frail and wispy, like a pseudo-wudo kind of looking thing, there's no reason why it should not be, why it should be immune to modifications to speed by armor and encumbrance. That's only there because of dwarves. And I will say that that is probably the worst thing about this system. There's a lot of unnecessary prerequisites because of the way the system was built. For example, elves in Pathfinder have an ability where you get +2 bonus to caster level checks to overcome spell resistance, and a +2 bonus to spellcraft checks to identify a spell as it's being cast. This system takes that ability, calls it Elven Magic, and then says prerequisite, elf. It's therefore impossible for another race to have those abilities without being an elf, which doesn't make any sense. There's no reason why I couldn't create a race that has those as an ability without it being an elf. So, and the system does tell you at the very beginning in the introduction that you don't have to pay attention to those rules. There's no reason why you have to stay confined. But I self-imposed that while making the Kalupins. I said, yes, I have to. Next section, you have your ability score modifiers. You get a choice of different ones. The standard one, which doesn't cost any points, that every normal player character race would follow, is you get +2 to one physical ability, +2 to one mental ability, and -2 to any of your others. That's the standard. Everything from there is either off of that. Specialized gives you +2 to 2 physical or 2 mental, and a penalty to one of the other ones. And because you're getting 2 bonuses in the same area, it costs you a single point. There's a bunch of different ones. For the most part, I like sticking to standard or specialized. Those are my 2 favorite. They also have, for example, here's one, human heritage. In order to get +2 to just one score, that's your only ability adjustment. You have to be human. It doesn't cost any points because it's not really that advantageous, but according to the system, you have to be human to do it. Which is why humans, half-elves, and half-orcs in Pathfinder have that as their ability score bonus. It's reflecting their human heritage. But if you wanted to create new races for a world that doesn't have any humans in it, you know, by the system's rules as written, you couldn't do it. But obviously, of course, you could make those choices. Then you choose your languages. I like here, standard means you get up to 7 languages as a pool from which to choose for high intelligence. Xenophobic says you don't get common and you get a smaller pool. And then linguist says you get common, your racial language, and then you can pick any language you want except for Druidic and other secret languages. Then your racial traits. This is the bulk of the system. There's different categories. There's ability score traits, defense traits, movement traits, feat and skill traits, offense traits, magic traits, other traits. And then each of them is broken down into categories. For example, for our first one, ability scores, you can see that this is the advanced trait category. Advanced is the next step up. There's standard races, which get about 10 RP or racial points. Advanced races get like 20. And then there's monstrous races, which get even more points. In addition to the number of points, it also changes which abilities you have access to. So advanced traits, in the ability score section, you can get an extra +2 bonus to any of your ability scores for 4 points. But a normal race, standard power level, can't choose those. Again, you can break the rules, but when I was doing the Kalupins, I had to follow the rules exactly. I'm moving the microphone, so I hope it doesn't make noises. Defense traits, there's a bunch of different traits. They all have different... A lot of them come from the races in the actual advanced race guide. They'll take racial abilities that were on those other races and pull them here and make them abilities. For example, Breeze Kissed here, which is one I really wanted to use. You're surrounded by swirling winds. You get a +2 bonus to armor class against non-magical ranged attacks. You can cause them to rise or lower as a swift action. And once per day, you can cause a single gust that does a bull rush or trip combat maneuver at range of up to 30 feet. So this is actually an ability of the Sylphs. And I'm wondering, I can't remember. I don't even think it's a basic ability that they have. I think it's one that you can, like an alternate racial trait for them. And you can trade out some of your normal Sylph abilities to gain this. But that's where a lot of these come from. Cat's Luck. That comes from the Catfolk race. Celestial Resistance. This is straight off of an Ozimar. Cornered Fury. I know the Rat Folk have this as an ability. Crystalline Form, I think, is one of the alternates for the Oreads, which are the Earth elemental plane-touched people. Things like that. So they keep going down. Here's like Defensive Training Lesser. This is the one that the dwarves have, where you get a +4 bonus against one type of humanoid. And the subtype that dwarves choose is Giant, so they get a +4 bonus against giants. But there's all kinds of abilities, and they keep going on and 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 on. Nope, still going, still going, still going, still going, still going, still going. There you go. That's the end of it. It's a very large amount of abilities, and it's a lot of fun to read through them and figure out what you want to give to your races. Now, for Kalupins, let me see if I can pull up the right one here. No. Nope. There we go. So here's the Kalupins. Pay no attention to the Robert Burbles. So I gave them +2 Constitution and +2 Wisdom. Now, normally they had a penalty to Wisdom, but I said that doesn't really make sense. We're talking about these dog-type creatures. We definitely want them to have good perception. We definitely want them to have the ability to use, like, survival and tracking people. And those all key off of Wisdom. So it didn't make sense to give them a penalty there if we want them to be good at it. We did give them a penalty to Charisma. This is actually the exact same ability score adjustments that Dwarves get in Pathfinder. They have the Kalupin subtype. They're medium size. They have normal speed. The reason why they have normal speed is that giving someone a flat 10-foot bonus to speed so that they have a normal speed of 40 is a advanced ability. So Kalupins, when I was following the rules as written, couldn't take that as a standard level race. They have low light vision. They can see well in the dark. That was also one of the abilities that they had originally. They have a natural weapon, a bite attack. Normally it deals a D6 damage. In this, in the advanced race guide, bite attack started at D3 for medium-sized creatures. And then you can double the points. I think it costs 1 point to get a bite attack. If you pay 2 points, then your die goes up 1 step. So for a medium-sized creature, it goes from a D3 to a D4, which is ridiculously stupid because it's raising your average damage from 1.5 to... Is it 1.5? 1 plus 2 plus 3... No, from 2. 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6. Divided by 3 is 2. So it raises your average damage from 2 to 2.5. That's right. A D3 is an odd-numbered die. For an even-numbered die, it's half the size plus 0.5. So for an odd-numbered die, it would also be half the size plus 0.5. So 1.5 plus 0.5 is 2. So you raise your average damage from 2 to 2.5. It's ridiculous. Whereas if you went from a D4 to a D6, you go up from 2.5 to 3.5, which is a whole point of damage between the two dice. Anyway, I gave them a big bite. They have natural armor. That was also something they had originally. So I gave them natural armor. Here it is bolded because I wasn't sure. It brings them to 11 points, which is over the limit. But dwarves, which is also a standard race, also have 11 points worth of abilities. Sprinter. There is an ability for normal creatures called Sprinter. It gives you plus 10 to your speed when charging, running, or withdrawing. So while they won't normally move at 40 feet per round, when they're doing the things that they should be doing, they will be moving 40 feet per round. Weapon familiarity. They're proficient with bolas and greatswords. Now, weapon familiarity costs 1 point, and it gives you 2 weapon proficiencies. You don't have to use them both, but I decided why not. So obviously I gave them greatswords, and then I decided let's do something like a bola, because now I can totally see these Kalupins lined up. And I'm looking like at Braveheart. Think of the movie Braveheart. They're all lined up. They're all shouting and yelling, and they've all got their swords and stuff out. And then they come charging across the field. Now, they're all wielding these giant claymores, but they've only got them in one hand right now because they're all running forward, swinging their bolas. They'll throw their bolas at the front line of the enemy, who presumably, like if it's Kalupin on Kalupin warfare, are charging at them. So, now suddenly the front line is falling and tripping down to the ground. And the rest of them then can come swinging in with their two-handed weapons. The bola makes sense for a good weapon because of all of those reasons. It's not going to really do any damage, but it'll trip the opponent. You can throw it with just one hand while you're still holding on your two-handed sword with the other, things like that. So then they get common and Kalupin as languages, and with a high intelligence, they get any human language, dwarven, elven, gnome, goblin, halfling, and orc, blah, 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 blah. The original Kalupins, my brother decided their special little ability that wouldn't make any real sense was that they had... No one could speak Kalupin except for a Kalupin. It was called an unlearnable language. So if you were not a Kalupin, it was impossible for you to learn how to speak Kalupin. And I told him, this doesn't make any sense. You have like a language like Draconic. You have these giant lizards with these huge heads that are not shaped like, well, he had mentioned like his argument was they have these dog heads with these dog mouths and dog tongues. And so people can't learn to speak that language because of they don't have the physiology for it. And I said, people can learn to speak Draconic even though they don't have the the dragon head with the long snout and the forked tongue and all that other stuff. And he says, too bad, so sad you can't learn Kalupin. I said, at least make it so that with magic you can speak it. Because as he had written it, even magic was powerless to let you speak Kalupin. So I think we did make that change. You couldn't learn it as like a language normally, but you could use like a tongues spell or something like that in order to speak it. But here I got rid of that. We're not doing that stuff. So there's the Kalupin kind of as written. And the next race that I made, this is getting a bit long, but I'll show the next race I made real quick. The next race I made was these Robert Burbles. If you haven't watched Thundercats before, you should, because Robert Burbles are awesome, and I've loved them since I was a child. And probably second only to Christopher Walken, I wish I could talk like a Robert Burble. No, it's Robert Bill. Robert Bill is awesome. So this is where specifically I wanted to create the Robert Burbles because I was using the half construct. I saw that they had this half construct and half undead template, and I really wanted to use it. And I'm like, well, I'll make a half construct because half undead is kind of stupid. And this is also kind of stupid, but I'm like, what would be half robot and not half robot? And the first thought that came to mind was a Robert Burble. So here's my Robert Burbles. You can see that they have quite the long description. They are 10 points, I believe exactly. And what I was using when I designed them is this Word document. This is just a little thing where I was keeping notes on what I was going to do. So as I went through, I said they're half construct and they have the Burble subtype. I had mentioned before you have like elf as a subtype and there's a bunch of elves that go along with it. But then you have something like Tengu as a subtype and there's really only one Tengu. Well, my idea here was I was going to create a couple races where the subtype would actually matter. So right now I only have one Burble, and it's the Robert Burble. But rather than give them a subtype, I did give them a subtype of Robert Burble. That's not right. Because I think if we go to the Word document, their subtype is Burble. So yeah, that's what it actually is. This is, by the way, the official write-up, and the this notepad document is the unofficial worksheet. So they have the Burble subtype. And I was going to say in the future I'll create more Burbles, and that'll make sense. They're small, because Robert Burbles are small. They're slow, because they're slow. I gave them a mixed weakness. I definitely wanted them to have a Constitution and Wisdom bonus, because I wanted them to be tough, and I wanted them to have good will saves. But I also wanted them to have low dex, because they're these little clumsy, stubbly-armed robot bears. And I wanted them to have low charisma because they have unblinking eyes and their entire face is robotic. And they don't even have jaws. Their mouth is like this little red light, like Kit from Knight Rider. Wow, nobody's going to be old enough to get that. Well, actually, no. On this channel, I might very well have people old enough to get that. They speak Burble and pretty much the same languages as the Kalupins, but instead of Orc, they get Sylvan because Burbles live in the forest. So racial abilities. These are the abilities as they're called in the book. So they have dual-minded, which is specifically for half constructs. So they get +2 to will saves. They get this life-bound ability, which means that they're harder to kill and use negative energy and energy drain too. They have energy resistance. This is the one that breaks the rules. Getting energy vulnerability requires you to be an advanced race. But I said for the Burbles, I said, screw it, I'm breaking the rules now. Now that I know how the system works, I'll work it my own way. Since they're, actually, I keep saying that they're half metal. They're like 90% metal, so they get electricity resistance. And so you can see here, 7 points. Slow speed makes it 6. Mixed weakness ability scores makes it 4. Dual-minded makes it 5. Lifebound makes it 7. Energy resistance makes it 10. Energy vulnerability makes it 8. And dark vision makes it 10 again. So there were 10 points. And you can see how much of a write-up they get because of that. Now I changed it so that instead of dual-minded, it's called stubborn. There actually is an ability called stubborn, so that might confuse people, but what it means is just a +2 to will saves. They have a life support system, which is what gives them their bonuses against death effects and negative energy. They have energy resistance and electricity vulnerability. So that was the second race. And then the third race I made, which I won't go into as much detail, but I'm going to bring it up because it brings up a point. I'll bring it up here too. The Robert Burbles, I noticed it after creating the next race. There's a lot of abilities that they have, but if you actually think about what they get, there's nothing that they get to do. Kalupins get a bonus on these skill checks, which I don't think I mentioned when we went over them again. They get a bite attack. They get a charge bonus. They're proficient with greatswords. They have like some oomph to them. But when you're a Robert Burble, all of your racial abilities are just static passive bonuses. It's a bonus, and not even like to skills. It's a bonus to saving throws, which are even rarer, and you don't get to choose when to make a saving throw for the most part. Unlike a skill, you get to choose when you're going to use a skill. So these are defensive powerhouses, but they don't actually get to apply any kind of actual ability from their race. Obviously, your class abilities and that on top of it. So the next race I made goes back to my brother again. After he finished making Kalupins, he made up a race called the Grass Runners. Now, they were based in part, mostly the name and appearance, on Mar from Record of Lodoss War, who was a grass runner, which is a race in Sword World RPG, which is a Japanese... It's probably like the most famous RPG in Japan. If you're in America and you talk about role playing, you're basically everybody's going to say D&D. If you go to Japan and you talk about role playing games, everybody's going to think Sword World. That's the Japan D&D. But the actual grass runners my brother made have no real relation to the grass runners from Sword World. Anyway, grass runners are these little halfling fairy... I don't want to say fairy. These little halfling-looking dudes that have a number of like tricky illusion-based spell-like abilities. And I think they also got a sleep spell because Mar in Record of Lodoss War puts people to sleep with a song. And the weird ability my brother gave them is that they're immune to vampiric domination. Vampires cannot use their innate spell-like ability to dominate people on a grass runner. And my brother had a little backstory that went along with that, how like they were enslaved by a vampire and they eventually broke free, and because of that, they're immune to the domination effect now. I don't know. Anyway, after he created the grass runners, he created these... Grass runners are elves, so my brother created the Drow Shadow Runners, which were evil grass runners that had more powerful abilities and a lot of emphasis on stealth and shadow and darkness magic. Just like how the Drow are, and I think they were even like black-skinned, white-haired grass runners. So they were so totally the Drow, and it makes sense because my brother's really big into elves. I'm really big into dwarves. So I make the defensive powerhouse robot bears, and he makes the little Drow guys. But after he told me about them, I said, well, that's cool and all, but I don't like them. So I'm going to make up my own version of the grass runner, and I called it the Sun Runner. And this was, again, back in 3rd edition, and I decided, you know what, these guys are medium-sized. They're the tall, big guys. They're not real big, like, huge and buff or anything. They're just tall. They're very thin and willowy. And they were going to be the casters. Because shadow runners and grass runners have bonuses to, like, dexterity and charisma. Whereas sun runners were going to be smart and wise. And they were going to make for good wizards and clerics. And that was going to be their role. So we have the Sun Runners. And now here is where I went through the rules and I pulled out... I don't think it's in the list anymore. Yeah. Anyway, I created the Fey Runner subtype. And that was going to be for the Grass Runners, Shadow Runners, and Sun Runners. And if I thought about it in the future, I was going to do Wind Runners so I could finally use that Breeze Kissed ability. And what I did with it was I went through and I made a list of all the kinds of abilities. I deleted it now, but it's what I do for all the races that I'm creating. As I go through the list of racial abilities, I write down everything that seems to be a fit for my concept of the race. And then, after I've got that list, I go back and I pick out the couple that I think together make up the race. As you can see here, we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 points worth of abilities. And yet, look at how big this is versus the Kalupins. It's not that much bigger, but it's certainly bigger. And even worse is, okay, so the Sunrunners are medium sized. They have normal speed. Undo. They have a bonus to intelligence and wisdom, and they're not very strong. Emissary. They can roll twice when making a bluff or diplomacy check. Enclave Protector. They get +1 to caster levels on abjuration spells. They are constantly under non-detection, and once a day they can cast Fairy Fire, Obscure Object, or Sanctuary. Lightbringer gives them the ability to cast light at will, and +1 bonus to light-based spells, and they're immune to light-based dazzle and blindness. And Eternal Hope means they get +2 on saving throws against fear and despair, and once a day on a natural 1, they can re-roll their d20. They have a lot of abilities that you can use. This was like the complete opposite of the Robert Burbles. These guys, while they have some passives, for the most part, they have active abilities. But when you look at a race, some of the races in the book, they just have so much compared to other races in the book. Particularly the fact that they have like a constant spell-like ability and then 4 actual spell-like abilities on top of that. So they're very magical. And that's when I went back and I looked at some of the races in the book, and I might have been thrown off a little bit by the fact that for the most part I'm looking at the uncommon races, because that's where some of my favorites are. But they tend to be very short and sweet. They have just 3 or 4 abilities, and usually one of those is just like skill bonuses. So they really only have like 2 or 3 abilities. And that's how they define their whole race. And that's it. And that's what I was kind of aiming for in the future. So here's like the Geckotan. They have climb speed, dark vision, and then skill bonus. And that's it. And these are lizard people. This is actually based on the Gripply. I wanted to make geckos. Geckos are one of the only lizards that can actually vocalize, by which I mean they make a noise, a vocal noise. Other lizards can make like a hissing noise and things like that, but that's not vocalizing, where there's actual vocal cords to make the sound. Geckos and I want to say a type of iguana or a chameleon, one or the other, can make an actual noise. Geckos actually sound like birds. They make bird-like chirping noises. And a long time ago, you can see these guys have a Dejani as their subtype. I have a continent in my game world called Dejan, and it's a ruined civilization, and the only people that kind of live there now are these lizard men who occupy this barren wasteland. And that's where you get things like scavenger and camouflage. And the only ones of those lizard men that can talk, because this was meant that the PCs would have to go through a whole continent and then kind of cross an ocean. Imagine that you're adventuring in the United States. Dejan is South America, so you have to go through all of Mexico and the Panama, all through that, Latin America, and then you finally end up in Dejan. So it's very far away. So it wasn't meant to be until like way later. But by the time you get there, the only people you'll meet all these lizard people, but only the gecko ones can talk. Everyone else has their own non-verbal language, which is in what real lizards do. It's based on body positioning, and they'll do like push-up looking things, and they'll move their head back and forth. And that's how the lizard men communicate to each other, and only the gecko ones can actually talk. And also that means that only the gecko ones can actually cast spells that require verbal components, but that's another rule. They're also proficient with the Atlas. So that's a club with a hook on it that's attached to a rope. And what you do with it is you swing it. Well, you don't have to swing it by the rope. Actually, I take that back. You throw the club, and you're either going to hit the person with the club and hurt them, or you use the hook on the club when you pull back on the rope to try and trip people. So I gave them that. It's kind of like an old primitive-y type weapon, which is what you'd expect with these guys. Yeah. The last one, we'll just go real quick. This is the Alontar. Forget the name. It's really stupid. I made it up on the... But I wanted to use the Fey type. Since I didn't actually make the Sunrunners a Fey, I made them a humanoid. I said, let's make an actual Fey. So the Alontar, if I have them here... Yeah, how many points are they worth? They're worth 2, 4, 6, 8... 11 points. So I tried to keep them to the same limit. And I just gave them the same I called it Fey Magic. This is the Gnome Magic ability. Fleet-footed, they get run as a bonus feat +2 to initiative. They get +4 to lie to people, low light vision, and quadruped. That's why I made them. I wanted to use the Fey type, and I saw that there was this quadruped ability. It's like the very last ability in the entire list, and it gives you 4 legs. And I said, okay, well, let's make a deer centaur. So they're deer in the back, pretty people up front, and they're really good at lying to you, kind of like a satyr, almost. But when I say it's a centaur, so they actually have a deer like body and 4 legs, not like a satyr where they just have, you know, goat legs or horse legs. They actually have the whole horse body behind them, but it's a deer in this case, because I wanted to keep them medium size. Anyway, the point of all this was I made up a bunch of races. I actually have a lot more that I want to make up, but when I was talking to my brother, I said, I was discussing the Kalupins and all that, and I said, I looked at the races I made, and look what I've got. I've got dog people, I've got robot bear people, I have lizard people, and then I have deer-butted people. I said, I'm making up a bunch of animal people. And he said, well, why don't you just do a bunch of animal people? And I said, okay, I'll make up Animal Planet. And that's the video I'll talk about next time. This is kind of the background for it. But I decided, let's start with the Kalupin, and from there, let's create a world that's just got these animal people in it. And so that's where I'm at. Until next time, bye-bye.